Alright, the first part of this operation, the video cut itself short by accident, but I went ahead and took the front stabilizer bar out and the shocks, of course. There's the damaged bracket for the stabilizer. I can probably straighten that out and clean it up. And there's the condition of the shock absorbers. The bottom mount is a cross pin style. Top mount is typical stem type. Of course, I had to cut the nuts off to get them out, and the bushings are in pretty rough shape. And I don't think that these are the original shocks, but I'm not sure. And here you can see the two different size washers on the bottom. Not sure if that's original either. This cross pin is open ends on both sides. If it was closed in on one side, that might explain the smaller washer and the larger washer on the open side, but I'm just not sure. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm going to replace everything, of course. Over to the passenger side, here's a better view of the dust cover that's on top of the Kingpin. And to get it out, I take my heavy-duty pick, punch a hole in it. Once you get the hole in it, go in at an angle, and then pry it right out. That's the way that comes out. And the bottom one the same way. Just go in straight. As you get the hole punched in, start changing the angle. And it'll pry out eventually. And again, taking the lock pin out of the steering knuckle support. Okay, so this Kingpin is cooperating better than the other side. I'm going to go ahead and drive it out. It's hard to get a good swing on it up in the wheel well. Okay, once you get it once you get it past the area here of the knuckle support, it'll just come right out. So there's the flat spot where the lock pin goes in to hold the Kingpin in the support. And I've got a shim right here like I did on the other side. There's the shim. Alright, and then this bushing right here. So this is actually a thrust bearing. It's not a bushing. I think I called it a bushing a minute ago. You do get new ones with the Kingpin kit. And also looks like you get these shims with the Kingpin kit as well. And these may be just thrust washers as well though, because there's only a couple of them in here. So in other words, you don't have an option on thicknesses. So I'll measure the thickness of that one, and I'll measure the thickness of this one and make sure it's the same. And that's what your new dust covers look like right there. There's the new lock pins, and it looks like a couple of O-rings in here. I only see 2 O-rings. Oh, and I did go over there and get the other Kingpin out after all. You can see it was almost seized in the knuckle support. Not quite, but it's got some rust on it and some pitting. So I guess it's a good idea to change them, which I was going to do anyway. But I'm not sure about this O-ring. I would imagine it goes in these grooves, but I would need 4 of them, and I only see 2 of them in the kit, so I'll just have to research that a little bit. Here's the new bushings that go in the steering knuckle, and they've got some oiling holes or grease holes that have to line up a certain way. One other thing worth noting is these bolts that hold the backing plate on, the brake backing plate. See, one of them has this big extension on it. That's what goes up against the support for the steering stop. The front is used as a stop as well, but the back one is the one that has the extension on it. So just something to pay attention to when it's going back together. So now, next I want to remove the steering knuckle support. So now I'm going to disconnect the knuckle support at the bottom pin. A couple of things I want to notice is the grease fittings in the back. This is facing the back of the car. There's a rubber, big heavy rubber, looks like an O-ring right here, but it's just to hold the grease in. So I've got to support the lower control arm with the jack while I disconnect this in order to keep the spring from flying out. And the spring can be dangerous, so I am going to chain it to the control arm to make sure it doesn't fly out. I think this spring is about 16 inches tall with about 7 or 8 inches up in the frame, so I'm not really worried about it coming loose and springing out from up here. The frame's going to control the spring, the top of the spring, but I do want to tie the bottom of the spring to the control arm just to make sure it doesn't go anywhere until I get the control arm down and get some of the tension off and see how it's going to act. Had to let it back down and put some blocks of wood under there because I could not lift it all the way off of this jack stand, and I wanted to see a little gap in that jack stand, a little air gap there, so I know that I've got the A-arm lifted up. Let's see what this will do. Alright, so the jack stand's loose, so that means I'm up all the way. Almost have the bumper, rubber bumper against the frame, but that's good right there. So now I'm going to loosen the pin, the lower outer control arm pin. So this nut right here comes off. It sort of locks the pin in. Nut and washer. Alright. And then the pin itself is actually threaded into both sides of the control arm, here and here. So that's what it looks like. That's what it looks like coming out. Notice too this rubber bumper, this upper rubber bumper. Look at that. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty shot there. So I'm going to continue taking this out. My neighbor decided to cut his grass right now, so I'll spare you that. Alright, now the fun part. Alright, I got a lot of tension on the chain that I put on there as a safety precaution. So I'm gonna jack it back up and take that chain off. Alright. Alright, so the spring is out of its seat on the bottom. I think most of the energy is released. Alright. Knuckle support. Here's the top insulator. Pretty shot. I don't even see the bottom insulator. It's supposed to have one on the bottom too. But anyway, so that's that. Next operation will be to go ahead and remove the lower control arm. The lower inner control arm shaft is held to the cross member with 4 bolts. 4 nuts rather. 3/4 inch. So they were in fact through bolted. I thought they were on studs, but they were actually through bolted. So I had to be able to hold the top of the bolt to back the nut off. The bolt was a 5/8, the nut was 11, was rather 3/4. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect the knuckle support from the upper control arm, and I'm going to do that by removing this pin. You don't need to loosen this bolt yet. That's a lock bolt. It locks the upper part of the knuckle support to the pin. The pin is eccentric, and this is where you get your caster and camber adjustment. When you go to put this assembly back together, it's very important that this section of the knuckle support is centered between here and here on the control arm. That will supposedly give you maximum adjustment either way. So, alright, so I'm going to pull these pieces out now. Alright, so there's your threaded pin. Here's your grease seal, one on each side. Now your control arm is threaded on both sides, and the eccentric or cam is threaded all the way through. So this threaded pin goes all the way through. And here's a better view of the lock bolt that locks the knuckle support to the cam. So the upper control arm, the inner shaft is through bolted down into the cross member. And here's what it looks like from below, looking up through the spring, where the spring would be. And that circle in the center is where the shock absorber mounts.